My garden in the Blue Ridge Mountains is a quiet conversation with the dead. Every rose bush, every stubborn patch of lavender, every fat, heavy heirloom tomato was planted with my late husband. Frank, his hands large and gentle and infinitely capable, are in the soil here. His quiet, rumbling laugh is in the whisper of the wind through the tall pine trees that border our property. For the 5 years since he's been gone, this garden has been my sanctuary, my church, my one true and living memorial to a good man's life. My name is Carol Peterson. I am 70 years old. For 40 of those years, I was a hospice nurse. I have spent my life in the quiet, sacred rooms of the dying. I am a professional connoisseur of last breaths, of final whispered regrets, of the strange, terrible, and sometimes beautiful business of a human life coming to its end. I am not a sentimental woman. I am a pragmatic one. I believe in the science of medicine, the dignity of a good death, and the profound and deeply underrated power of a quiet, honest presence. Frank's death 5 years ago was the defining event of my life. It was not a quiet, gentle fading. It was a war. A brutal 18-month siege against the most vicious, most relentless, and most unforgiving of enemies, pancreatic cancer. I was his wife, but I was also his nurse, his advocate, his warrior. I was with him for every doctor's appointment, for every nauseating round of chemotherapy, for every middle-of-night trip to the emergency room. I learned the language of his enemy with a scholar's intensity. I knew the names of the chemo drugs, Falfarinix, a brutal chemical carpet bombing of the body. I knew the specific cruel symptoms of the tumor's encroachment on the celiac plexus, the gnawing, unbearable back pain that no amount of morphine could seem to touch. I knew the false hope of a temporary remission, and I knew the grim, final, and unmistakable signs of the end. I held his hand as he took his last, ragged breath in our own bed, in this house, a quiet, dignified death that was the one small mercy in a long and brutal war. The grief, when it came, was a vast, silent, and empty country, and I have been living in it, quietly and contentedly, ever since. My life is small now. It is my garden. It is my volunteer work at the local animal shelter. It is my quiet, peaceful, and blessedly uncomplicated solitude.org. It was. Until my brother Danny, the prodigal son of my own personal lifelong Bible of family drama, decided to come home. I have not seen my brother in almost 10 years. Danny, my younger and infinitely more charming brother. He is a man who has lived his entire life like a beautiful, untethered balloon, drifting from one grand, failed idea to the next, always managing to land softly on a cushion of other people's money and goodwill. He is a master of the charming apology, of the heartfelt and deeply fraudulent promise to do better next time. He has been a real estate agent in Florida, a failed screenwriter in Los Angeles, an importer of artisanal alpaca sweaters. From Peru, he has been married 3 times, has a string of disappointed children he rarely speaks to, and a financial history that looks like a multi-car pileup. Our relationship has always been the same. He gets into trouble, and I, the sensible, responsible, and endlessly accommodating older sister, I bail him out. I have co-signed loans. I have paid his rent. I have listened for 60 years to his beautiful, brilliant, and deeply, deeply dishonest excuses. The last time I saw him was at Frank's funeral. He had flown in looking tanned and handsome, had given a beautiful, tearful, and utterly performative eulogy, and had then cornered me at the reception and asked for a $5,000 loan to get him out of some vague, unspecified trouble. It was the one and only time in my life I had said no to him. The raw, ugly, and deeply wounded look of pure, narcissistic rage on his face when I refused. It was the last I had heard from him, until last month the phone had rung. It was him. His voice was different. The old, confident salesman's charm was gone. It was replaced by a quiet, tired, and deeply remorseful whisper. "Carol," he'd said, "it's me. It's Danny." "I know who it is," I'd replied, my own voice a cool, neutral thing. "Listen," he'd said, and he let out a long, weary sigh. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything. I know I've been a terrible brother, a terrible person. Bah! I'm tired, Carol. I'm tired of running. I'm tired of the schemes. I want to come home, too. I want to spend some time with my big sister. You'll have me." The speech was, like all of his speeches, a masterpiece. It was a perfect, beautiful, and deeply, deeply suspicious appeal to my own long-suffering sense of sisterly duty. The old me, the me from before Frank's death, would have caved instantly. But the woman I am now, the woman who has sat at the bedside of 100 dying souls and has learned to distinguish a real, final act confession from a performance. I was not so sure, but he was my brother, my only brother, my last living link to our own shared and deeply complicated childhood. "Fine, Danny," I'd said, my voice a flat, non-committal thing. "You can stay in the guest room for a little while." He arrived a week later, and he was a different man. The flashy, performative charm was gone, replaced by a quiet, gentle, and deeply melancholy presence. He was thinner than I had ever seen him, his handsome face etched with new lines of what looked like real, genuine pain. He was helpful. He was quiet. He complimented my garden. He asked about Frank, his voice full of a soft and seemingly sincere regret. He was, for the first time in his life, the brother I had always wished he would be, and I, a lonely old woman in a big, empty house. I let myself believe it. I let the hope, that small, stupid, and endlessly resilient little weed, begin to grow in the barren soil of my own cynical heart. Maybe he had finally changed. Maybe this time it was real. The announcement, the great, terrible, and beautifully performed deception came 2 weeks after his arrival. He had asked me to invite a few of my oldest and dearest friends over for a quiet dinner. My neighbors, David and Sarah, my best friend from the hospice, a wonderful woman named Maria. He said he had something he wanted to share with us. With the people who had been so kind to him since his return, he made the announcement after dinner, in the soft, warm light of my living room. He was sitting in Frank's old armchair. He began to weep, the loud, theatrical sobs of his past, but a quiet, heartbreaking, and utterly convincing, silent weeping. "I haven't been honest with you all," he began, his voice a raw, broken whisper. "I didn't just come home because I was tired. I came home because I'm dying." 3 words landed in the quiet, comfortable room with the force of a physical blow. My own heart gave a sick, painful lurch. 2 months ago, he continued, his voice now a masterpiece of tragic, quiet resignation, I was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic adenocarcinoma. It's inoperable. It's metastasized to my liver. He was using the words, the exact, specific, and brutally clinical words from my own personal nightmare. He was speaking the language of Frank's death. My friends were a chorus of horrified, sympathetic gasps. Maria, who had been Frank's hospice nurse with me, her hand flew to her mouth. David and Sarah just stared, their faces a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. I just sat there, frozen, the room beginning to tilt on its axis. The doctors, he said, a single perfect tear rolling down his cheek. They gave me 6 months, maybe less. A chemotherapy, the fulfurinics. It's not working. Key looked at me, his eyes full of a deep and deeply, deeply fraudulent pain. I have the same thing Frank had, Carol. The exact same thing. It was a masterstroke of cruelty. A work of pure sociopathic genius. He was not just claiming a sickness. He was claiming my sickness. He was claiming my husband's death. He was taking the most sacred, most painful chapter of my own life, and he was making it the script for his own, final and most magnificent. Performance, my friends, of course were magnificent. They were a wave of pure, compassionate, and deeply human love. They surrounded him, they hugged him, they wept with him. And then the next and most important part of his plan began. "Is there anything we can do, Danny?" My neighbor David asked, his voice thick with emotion. "No," Danny said with a brave, tragic smile. "It's just the insurance. It doesn't cover all of the end-of-life care. The alternative treatments I want to try to make the time I have left a little more comfortable." He let the sentence hang in the air. A beautiful, perfect, and deeply manipulative lure. And my best friend Maria, of course, took the bait. A GoFundMe. She declared, her face shining with the bright, beautiful light of a helper who has just been given a mission. "We'll start a GoFundMe. The whole town will help. We'll make sure you have everything you need. Danny, you won't have to worry about a thing." And Danny, my brother, the brilliant, lying, and deeply, deeply evil man, he looked at her, his face a mask of such profound, humble, and utterly counterfeit gratitude that it was the most monstrous and the most convincing thing I had ever seen. I don't know what to say," he whispered. "You are all just angels." The GoFundMe page was live by the next morning. It had a beautiful, smiling photo of Danny and a long, tragic, and beautifully written story of his brave, final battle. A story that was a plagiarized and deeply profane echo of my own husband's real and truly brave final battle. The town of Asheville, my kind, compassionate, and deeply, deeply gullible town, opened its heart and its wallet. The donations poured in. $1,000. 5,000. 10. I just watched a silent, frozen ghost at the center of this storm of manufactured grief. My mind was at war. The hospice nurse in me was listening to the medical details of his story. And a small, cold, and deeply professional part of my brain was saying, "This is wrong. The timeline is wrong. The symptoms he's describing, they don't quite add up." But the grieving widow, the lonely older sister who had just, for a brief, beautiful moment, thought she had gotten her brother back. She was the one who was in control. And she was the one who was drowning out the quiet, insistent, and deeply terrifying voice of her own suspicion. She wanted to believe, and so she did. For a little while, the first few weeks after my brother's devastating announcement were a blur of performative grief. My quiet, peaceful home was transformed into a public stage for the final, tragic act of his life. The town of Asheville, with its big, compassionate, and deeply sentimental heart, adopted my brother as its own. There was a constant revolving door of well-wishers. Friends from my book club would arrive with casseroles. Members of my late husband's poker group would stop by to sit with Danny on the porch and share old stories. The GoFundMe page, which my friend Maria had dutifully set up, became a digital monument to our town's generosity, the total rising with a speed that was both beautiful and, to a small, cold, and deeply suspicious part of my soul, deeply sickening. Danny, for his part, played the role of the brave, dying man with a masterful and deeply unsettling conviction. He was a magnificent performer. He was weak, but never too weak. He was sad, but never too sad. He would sit on my porch, a blanket draped over his legs, even on the warmest days, and he would tell stories, his voice a quiet, tragic whisper, to a rotating, adoring audience. He spoke of his regrets, of the life he had wasted, of his newfound appreciation for the simple, beautiful things. The sunset over the Blue Ridge Mountains, the taste of a fresh, local apple. The love of a sister he had, he confessed with a perfect, tearful catch in his voice taken for granted for far too long. He was so good, so convincing, that for a while I almost believed him myself. The hospice nurse in me, the woman who had spent a lifetime caring for the dying, was at war with the older sister, the woman who had spent a lifetime being conned by a master manipulator. My heart, still so raw from the real, brutal, and deeply unperformative death of my own husband, wanted to believe in this new, gentle, and remorseful version of my brother. I wanted desperately to have my brother back, even if it was just for a few final months. But my mind, the cold, clinical, and deeply experienced mind of a medical professional, began to notice the inconsistencies. They were small things at first, tiny, discordant notes in his otherwise perfect symphony of suffering. The first was his appetite. The chemotherapy regimen he claimed to be on, Phenix, was a brutal chemical carpet bombing of the human body. I knew it intimately. I had held Frank's hand through every single nauseating round of it. It had destroyed his appetite. In his final 6 months, he had subsisted on a diet of nutrient shakes and lukewarm broth. Eating was a chore, a painful, metallic-tasting battle he had to force himself to endure. Danny, however, had the appetite of a teenage boy. He would make a show of picking at his food when we had guests, pushing the peas around his plate with a sad, weary sigh. But when we were alone, when he thought I wasn't looking, he would devour everything in the house. I came into the kitchen late one night to find him, bathed in the blue light of the open refrigerator, eating the last massive piece of a lasagna I had made, right out of the pan with his bare hands. He saw me, and he had the grace to look momentarily ashamed. "The steroids they give me for the nausea," he'd mumbled, his mouth full. "They give me the weirdest cravings." I had just nodded, but the cold, quiet, and deeply suspicious voice in the back of my mind had whispered, "The steroids they give you with Phenix don't make you hungry, Danny. They make you not want to be alive." The inconsistencies began to pile up, a slow, steady accumulation of evidence in the quiet, secret courtroom of my own mind. Kay claimed to be suffering from the intense, gnawing back pain of the tumor pressing on his celiac plexus, the same pain that had left my Frank unable to sleep, unable to find a moment of peace. But I would see Danny sitting on the porch for hours, laughing and joking with my friends, his posture relaxed, his movements easy. He never winced. He never shifted uncomfortably. He was performing the idea of pain, but he was not, I began, to realize actually feeling it. Then there were the medical details. His stories were good. They were full of the kind of specific, terrifying jargon that makes a story feel real. He had clearly spent a great deal of time on WebMD, but he was an amateur reciting a script. And I was a professional who had lived the reality. And I began to notice the small but significant errors in his performance. He would complain one afternoon about the terrible, tingling neuropathy in his hands, a common side effect of the chemo. "It's so frustrating," he'd said with a sigh, looking at his hands. "I can barely hold my phone to play my video games." I had just looked at him, my face a mask of sympathy, but my mind was a screaming, chaotic storm of memory. Was remembering Frank in his final months. His neuropathy wasn't a frustrating inconvenience. It was a form of torture. He couldn't hold a fork. He couldn't button his own shirt. I had to feed him, to dress him, to care for him like a child. The idea of him being worried about his ability to play a video game was so absurd, so deeply, and so profoundly insulting to the reality of Frank's suffering, that I had to leave the room, a hot, angry bile rising in my throat. He would talk about his weekly port flush, a routine procedure for a chemo patient. But he would get the gauge of the needle wrong. He would talk about the specific metallic taste the chemo left in his mouth, but he would describe it in a way that was just off. He was like a bad actor in a hospital drama, a man who had learned all his lines but had no understanding of the real human and deeply agonizing story he was pretending to be a part of. The hospice nurse in me was no longer at war with the sister. The nurse was winning. And she was coming to a cold, terrible, and increasingly undeniable conclusion. My brother was not sick. He was a liar. A magnificent, brilliant, and deeply, deeply evil liar. But I had no proof. All I had was a collection of my own expert and deeply personal suspicions. And if I voiced them, if I dared to question the brave, dying, and universally beloved town martyr, I knew what would happen. I would not be seen as a truth-teller. I would be seen as a monster, a cold, cruel, and unfeeling sister, so bitter and so jealous that she would rather believe her own brother was a fraud than accept the tragic reality of his illness. The final irrevocable and soul-shattering proof came on a Friday afternoon. Friday, August 15th, a date that will be burned into my memory for the rest of my life. The GoFundMe had just passed its $100,000 goal. The whole town was celebrating. Danny had posted a new, tearful, and deeply moving update, thanking everyone for their generosity, for giving him the gift of a peaceful and dignified end. He was, he wrote, having a bad day. He was feeling too weak to see any visitors. He just needed to rest. I had spent the morning volunteering at the animal shelter, a blessedly honest place where the pain was real and the needs were simple. I was driving home, my heart heavy with the sheer, suffocating weight of my brother's lies. I was tired of the performance. I was tired of the quiet, secret rage. On a whim, I decided to take the long way home, a beautiful, winding, and usually deserted road that went through the back of the Pisgah National Forest. I needed to see something real, something true. The quiet, ancient, and deeply honest majesty of the mountains. I was driving slowly, a sad old song playing on the radio when I saw him. A lone figure on a steep, difficult trail that snaked. up the side of the mountain. A jogger. He was wearing a gray sweatsuit and a baseball cap pulled down low. But I recognized him instantly. It was his gait. The easy, athletic, and deeply familiar way he moved. It was Danny. My foot slammed on the brake, the car skidding to a stop on the gravel shoulder. I just sat there, my heart a frozen, dead thing in my chest. He was not just walking. He was running. He was sprinting up a steep, difficult incline. His body powerful, his breathing easy. He was a picture of perfect, vibrant, and deeply, deeply fraudulent health. He reached the top of the hill and he stood there for a moment, his hands on his hips, breathing deeply, a look of pure, exhilarating joy on his face. The joy of a man who has just pushed his body to its limit and has found it strong. The joy of a man who was not, in any way, shape, or form, dying. And as I sat there, watching my healthy, vibrant, and lying brother, a final, terrible, and deeply clarifying memory came back to me. A memory of my Frank. It was from his last week. Of life he had wanted more than anything, to walk to the porch to see his garden one last time. It had taken us 20 minutes to make the 30-foot journey from our bed to the front door. I had held him up, his arm around my shoulder, his body a frail, skeletal, and impossibly heavy weight. Every single step was in agony. He had stood on that porch for 30 seconds, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps, and he had looked at his roses. And then he had collapsed, and I had had to carry him back to his bed. The contrast, the sheer, profane, and utterly unforgivable sacrilege of it. It broke something inside me. It's the last lingering and deeply foolish shred of my own sisterly love, of my own desperate hope that I was somehow wrong. It just died. It died on that lonely mountain road. I watched as my brother, the man who was supposedly too weak to see visitors, the man who had stolen the intimate, sacred details of my own husband's agonizing death, finished his triumphant sprint. He turned and he began to jog easily and happily back down the trail. Disappearing into the woods, I just sat in my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel. A profound and deeply, deeply cold silence in my soul. The time for suspicion was over. The time for doubt was over. The hospice nurse had made her final, definitive diagnosis. And the sister, the grieving widow, the quiet, sensible, and endlessly accommodating aunt. She had finally, after a lifetime of deception, made her final and deeply, deeply satisfying decision. The time for quiet observation was over. The time for gathering the cold, hard, and unforgiving proof had begun. The drive home from the state park was a journey through a world that had been fundamentally, and irrevocably altered. The beautiful, sun-dappled trees, the majestic rolling peaks of the Blue Ridge Mountains, I saw none of it. All I saw, projected onto the inside of my own skull, was the image of my brother. My healthy, vibrant, and utterly fraudulent brother. Sprinting up a mountainside, his body a testament to a life of breathtaking, sociopathic lies. The grief I had been wrestling with for the past month, the small, hopeful, and deeply stupid part of me that had wanted to believe in his redemption, it was all gone. It had been replaced by a new and profoundly liberating emotion, a quiet, cold, and beautifully clear sense of purpose. The hospice nurse in me, the woman who had spent a lifetime in the service of the truth of dying, was now fully and finally awake. And she had a new patient. My brother's lies were a cancer. A malignant and metastatic disease that was infecting my town, my friends, and the sacred memory of my own husband. And I, the most qualified person on earth, was about to perform a radical and deeply necessary surgery. I got home. The house was quiet. Danny was not yet back from his vigorous, life-affirming day of rest. On the kitchen counter was a pile of sympathy cards and checks that had arrived in the mail, all addressed to my brave, dying brother. I looked at the checks, at the heartfelt, handwritten notes from my friends, my neighbors. Danny, we are all praying for you. Your courage is an inspiration to us all. I felt a surge of rage so pure, so absolute. It was almost a religious experience. This was not just a lie, it was a theft. He was stealing their money, yes. But he was also stealing their compassion, their empathy, their most decent and human impulses. And I was not going to let it continue for one more day. My first act of war was a quiet and deeply symbolic one. I went to my late husband's office. It was a room I had kept exactly as he had left it, a perfect and painful museum of his life. On his desk was his old leather-bound checkbook. It was connected to a small investment account he had started. For me, years ago, a rainy day fund he had insisted I keep separate from our main accounts. For you, Carol, he had said. For your own independence, I had never touched it. It contained a little over $50,000, the last tangible gift from my good and honest husband. I opened the checkbook, and I wrote the first check. It was to a man I had found online, a discreet and very expensive private investigator based in Miami, Florida. The city Danny had just come from. The city where I was quite sure the real story of his life was waiting to be discovered. I was going to use the last of my husband's money to protect the truth of his death. It was a painful and deeply, deeply satisfying act of poetic justice. My new mission required a new persona. The sad, grieving, and slightly suspicious sister was gone. In her place was a new character, a loving, doting, and completely, utterly, and magnificently gullible older sister. I was going to become the greatest, most supportive, and most treacherous ally my brother had ever had. I was going to kill him with kindness. My performance began the next morning. I knocked on his guest room door, a cheerful smile on my face, a tray in my hands. Danny, dear, I chirped, my voice a perfect, loving coo. I brought you some breakfast. You need to keep your strength up. He was in bed looking pale and tragic. It was a masterful performance. He'd likely just returned from another 5-mile run. Oh, Carol, he said, his voice a weak, grateful whisper. You shouldn't have. I'm not very hungry. Nonsense, I said, setting the tray on his bedside table. It was a massive, beautiful breakfast. Scrambled eggs, bacon, toast, a glass of fresh squeezed orange juice. You have to eat. For your treatments. And as he ate, his initial performative reluctance giving way to his true ravenous appetite, I began my own quiet and deeply treacherous interrogation. Speaking of your treatments, I said, my voice a symphony of sisterly concern. How was your last round of chemo? The full pharynx. I know how terrible it was for Frank. It was brutal, he said, his mouth full of bacon. Just brutal. The nausea, it's a killer. And the neuropathy. I pressed my heart a cold, steady beat. Frank's was so terrible he couldn't even feel his own fingers. Is yours as bad? "Oh, yes," he said, shaking his head with a sad, tragic look. "It's awful. My hands they tingle all day. It's almost impossible to get a good score on my video games now." I just nodded, my face a mask of pure, loving sympathy. And in my pocket, my hand was resting on the small digital voice recorder I had just purchased. It was on. It was recording every single one of his beautiful, stupid, and legally actionable lies. For the next 2 weeks, I was his angel of mercy and his secret personal stenographer. I made him his favorite meals. I drove him to his doctor's appointments, which were, in reality, just trips to the mall where he would spend his ill-gotten GoFundMe money on new, expensive clothes. And the entire time, I would ask him questions. Gentle, caring, and deeply, deeply incriminating. Questions I would ask him about his oncologist, a Dr. Ramirez in Miami, a man I already knew. From my own initial research did not exist. I would get him to describe the man, his office, his medical advice. I got him to describe, in great and medically ludicrous detail, the results of his last PET scan. He was not just lying. He was building an entire fictional medical history, a world of beautiful, intricate, and completely fraudulent detail. And I was recording every single glorious word of it. While I was managing the home front, my new, expensive friend in Miami, the private investigator, a gruff ex-cop named Miller, was digging up the truth. His first few reports were simple confirmations of what I already suspected. From Miller Investigations to C. Peterson's subject, Daniel Peterson Inquiry, Update 1, Carol. As per your request, I ran a full medical records search on your brother, Daniel Peterson, in the state of Florida. There is no record of him ever having been diagnosed with or treated for any form of cancer. A check of all registered oncologists in the Tri-County area shows no Dr. Ramirez. The man is, as you suspected, in perfect health. I'll keep digging. The second report, which arrived a week later, was more interesting. It was the answer to the question of why subject. Read Daniel Peterson Inquiry Update to Carol. The financial deep dive on your brother is complete. He is, to use the technical term, completely broke. He has a string of failed businesses, a number of default judgments against him, and a series of large, recent, and very hiantrous loans from a, shall we say, non-traditional lending institution. A local loan shark named Rico. It appears your brother owes Mr. Rico a little over $100,000. And Mr. Rico, from what I hear, is not a patient man. Seems your brother did not come to Asheville to die. Kay came to hide. The pieces were all clicking into place. The GoFundMe was not for his end-of-life care. It was to pay off a gambling debt to a gangster. The sheer, ugly, and pathetic truth of it was so much worse and so much more satisfying than I could have ever imagined. But it was the third report, the one that arrived late last night, that contained the final, beautiful, and utterly devastating. Smoking gun. Miller had found a witness. A disgruntled and very talkative ex-girlfriend of my brother's. And she had a story to tell. A story that was, it turned out, also on tape. Miller had attached a small audio file to his email. Danny_and_Tiffany.mp3. He recorded it himself. Miller had written in the email. Apparently, he liked to record their arguments. The man is a walking, talking evidence locker of his own stupidity. She was happy to provide it to me. Sat in my study, the house dark and silent. Danny was upstairs, sleeping the deep, peaceful sleep of a man with no conscience. I put on my headphones and I pressed play. The audio was a little tinny, but the voices were clear. It was Danny and a woman who I assumed was Tiffany. And they were arguing. "Tiffany, you can't be serious, Danny. You can't just run away. Rico will find you." "Danny, he won't find me in some sleepy little town in the mountains. I just need to lay low for a few months. Buy some time. I just need to get my hands on some real money fast. Tiffany, and how are you going? To do that, you have no job, no credit. You're a mess." And then I heard it. My brother's voice, full of the old, familiar, and deeply arrogant charm. "Danny, don't you worry about me, babe. I've got a plan. A genius plan. It's a guaranteed, can't-miss tax-free windfall." "Tiffany, what plan? What are you talking about?" And then the beautiful, terrible, and utterly damning confession. "Danny, I'm going to go visit my sister," he'd said, a chuckle in his voice. "My dear, old, and very, very sentimental sister. I'm going to tell her I'm dying, Tiffany." "What? You're insane. She'll never believe that." And then the line that sealed his fate. The line that was the most cruel, the most evil, and the most wonderfully, beautifully self-incriminating thing he could have possibly said. "Danny, oh, she'll believe it." "Huh?" he had said, his voice a smug, confident purr. "Because I'm going to tell her I have the exact same thing her sainted husband Frank had. Pancreatic cancer. It's perfect. It's poetic. He already wrote the script for me. All I have to do is give a convincing performance. And I, my love, am a very, very good actor." I took off my headphones. The silence of the house rushed back in. But it was a different kind of silence now. It was the silence of a tomb. His tomb, the one I was about to dig for him. I had it all. The medical proof, the financial motive. And now a full, unabridged, and gleefully delivered confession in his own arrogant and utterly stupid voice. My quiet, meticulous, and deeply personal investigation was over. I had all the evidence I would ever need. The time for spying, for setting the stage, was done. It was time, I knew, to think about the final, glorious, and very, very public performance. The one where my brother would finally get the standing ovation he so richly deserved. As you requested, this story is set entirely within the United States. The audio file my private investigator had sent me was a masterpiece of casual, cruel confession. My brother's voice, so full of a smug, self-congratulatory confidence as he laid out his genius plan, was the most damning thing I had ever heard. I listened to it once, my body going cold with a fury that was so pure it was almost a state of grace. Then I listened to it again, this time with the dispassionate ear of a hospice nurse, cataloging the symptoms of a soul that was completely and irrevocably diseased. The recording was enough. It was, I knew, enough to prove my case to the police, to the district attorney. But it was not enough for the kind of justice I now craved. It was audio only. It could be disputed. His lawyers could claim it was a joke, a flight of fancy, a conversation taken out of context. The ex-girlfriend Tiffany was a jilted lover, an unreliable witness. No, a legal battle would be a messy, protracted, and deeply unsatisfying affair. It would be a battle of paper, not of the soul. My brother's crime was not just a financial one. It was a crime of the heart, a crime of stolen grief. A crime of profound and deeply public emotional manipulation. And his punishment, I decided, had to fit the crime. It had to be public. It had to be emotional. It had to be a piece of theater as magnificent and as fraudulent as his own. I needed more than just his voice. I needed his accomplices. I needed a picture. I needed a smoking gun that was not just a sound, but a sight to behold. I called Mr. Miller, the private investigator. The next morning, "The audio is excellent, Carol," he said, his gruff ex-cop voice a welcome sound of competence. "It's a confession. Okay. We've got him." "It's not enough, Mr. Miller," I said, my own voice a calm, steady instrument. "It's a start, but it's not the end." In the recording, Tiffany mentions a friend of my brother's, the one he was bragging to, a man named Ricky. "Remember?" he said. "I want you to find Ricky," I said. "I want you to get him to tell you the story. And I want you to get it on video." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Carol," Miller said finally, his voice full of a new and deeply professional respect. "That is a very tall and very expensive order. This man, Ricky, he's not going to just confess to being an accessory to a felony to a stranger." "No, he's not," I agreed. "But he is, from what I have gathered from my brother's stories over the years, a man of a certain entrepreneurial spirit. He is a man who is always looking for the next big score." I paused, letting my own new and deeply unfamiliar predatory instincts take over. "So I suggest, Mr. Miller, that you go to Miami and you offer him one." The sting operation, as Miller later explained it to me in a series of detailed and deeply satisfying reports, was a work of art. Miller was not just a pie. He was, it turned out, a magnificent character actor. He flew to Miami. He shed the skin of the gruff ex-cop and he put on a new one. He became Mr. Black, a shady, high-rolling, and deeply plausible investor from Las Vegas, looking to fund a new, slightly less than legal real estate venture. He spent a week in the world my brother and his friend Ricky inhabited, a world of seedy bars and high-stakes poker games. He flashed his money. He dropped the right names. He made himself known. And then he found Ricky. He was exactly the man my brother had always described. A small-time grifter with big-time ambitions. A man whose greed was 1,000 times bigger than his intellect. Miller, in his new persona as Mr. Black, bought him a drink. He told him he was looking for a new partner, a man with nerve, a man who wasn't afraid to bend the rules. And then he laid the bait. He mentioned my brother. "I used to know a guy down here," Miller had said, his voice a low, conspiratorial purr as he recounted the story to me over the phone. "A real artist, a guy named Danny Peterson. You know him?" Ricky, according to Miller, had taken the bait immediately. "Danny," he'd said, a sad, disappointed look on his face. "I know Danny. He was my partner, my best friend. But he skipped town. Owes some very serious people a lot of money." "A shame," Miller had replied, shaking his head. "I heard he was working on a new scam before he left. A real masterpiece. Something about faking a cancer diagnosis." "And Ricky, my brother's brilliant, loyal, and deeply, deeply stupid best friend." His eyes had lit up. He saw a kindred spirit, a fellow admirer of the con. He saw a new, rich, and powerful friend he needed to impress. And so he began to sing. The final video arrived in my inbox late last night. It was a simple, unassuming file attachment. Ricky_confession.mp4. I sat in my quiet, dark study, the same room where my own husband had spent his final, pain-filled months. I took a deep breath, and I pressed play. The video was from a hidden camera, probably a button cam, just like the ones on the television shows. The setting was a dark, cheap-looking bar in Miami. Miller, as Mr. Black, was a marvel. All quiet menace and professional admiration. And Ricky was a star. He was drunk and he was bragging, his face full of the gleeful, immoral pride of a man who truly, genuinely believed that his friend's crime was a work of genius. Miller on video. So tell me about this cancer thing. It sounds audacious. Ricky laughing, slurring his words slightly. Audacious. It's beautiful, man. It's a work of art. He's a genius. Danny is. A total, absolute genius. He then proceeded for the next 20 glorious and utterly damning minutes to lay out the entire conspiracy. He bragged about how they had researched the symptoms online. He bragged about how Danny had practiced his sick voice and his tragic, pained expression in the mirror. And then he said the line, the one that was the final, beautiful, and utterly unforgivable nail in my own brother's coffin. Ricky, and the best part? The most genius part is that he's not just faking any cancer. He's faking the exact same cancer that killed his sister's husband. He's got all the details, all the inside information. It's the names of the chemo drugs, the symptoms, everything. He's using his own dead brother-in-law's tragedy as a script. The guy's got no soul. It's beautiful. He had laughed then, a loud, ugly, and deeply celebratory sound. And his sister, the sweet old lady, she's eating it up. Whole town is. They started a GoFundMe. It's already at $100,000. It's going to pay off his debts, and he's going to have a nice fat nest egg to start over with. It's the perfect crime. I stopped the video. Did not need to see any more. I sat in the silent, humming darkness of my own home, the ghost of my own husband all around me, and I felt a profound and deeply, deeply nauseating sense of clarity. The small, hopeful, and deeply stupid part of me that had still, after all of this, held out a tiny, microscopic shred of a belief that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. It was gone. It had been murdered, and its corpse had been laughed at by a drunken fool in a Miami bar. I now had the smoking gun. A high-definition, videotaped and gleefully delivered confession from the main co-conspirator. It was undeniable. It was irrefutable. And it was the most evil, most profane, and most deeply, deeply satisfying thing I had ever seen. My quiet, meticulous, and deeply personal investigation was over. I had all the evidence I would ever need. The time for spying, for setting the stage, was done. It was time, I knew, to think about the final, glorious, and very, very public performance. The one where my brother would finally get the standing ovation he so richly deserved. I picked up the phone. I did not call the police. Called my best friend Maria, the one who had, with such a good and deeply misguided heart, started the GoFundMe page. Maria, I began, my voice a perfect, loving, and deeply, deeply concerned instrument. I've been thinking about Danny. He seems so weak lately. The GoFundMe has been such a wonderful success. The whole town has shown him so much love. I paused, letting the bait settle, and I was thinking, I think we should do something special for him, something to really celebrate his life. A way for the whole town to say goodbye while he's still here to see it. "Oh, Carol," she said, her voice immediately full of a tearful, compassionate enthusiasm. "What a beautiful, heartbreaking idea! What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," I said, my own voice a masterpiece of tragic, loving inspiration, "that we should throw him a living funeral. The living funeral and legacy benefit for my brother. Daniel Peterson was the most beautiful, most heartfelt, and most completely fraudulent event in the history of Asheville, North Carolina." The community hall was packed to the rafters. It was a sea of sad, sympathetic faces, a testament to the profound and profoundly misplaced compassion of my small, trusting town. The room was decorated not with festive balloons, but with tasteful, somber flower arrangements. A large, professionally printed banner hung over the stage. It read, "Celebrating Danny, a life of courage and joy." The irony was so thick, so rich, it was almost a physical presence in the room, my brother. The guest of honor was a vision of tragic beatific grace. He had, for this special occasion, rented a wheelchair. He sat near the front of the stage, a soft cashmere blanket draped over his legs, his face pale and drawn. He had, I knew, spent the morning applying a light layer of theatrical makeup to achieve the perfect, gaunt, and deeply sympathetic look of a man on the verge of a noble death. He was a magnificent actor. And tonight, he was giving the performance of his life. He was the center of a slow, reverent hurricane of grief. Friends and neighbors would approach him one by one to press an envelope of cash into his hand, to touch his shoulder, to whisper a few tearful words of encouragement. "You're so brave, Danny. We're all praying for you. You've taught us all so much about what's really important in life." He would accept their offerings, their money, their love, with a humble, grateful, and utterly counterfeit smile, his eyes shining with unshed crocodile tears. I sat in the front row, the devoted, grieving older sister, and I watched. My face was a mask of sad sisterly pride. My heart was a block of Arctic ice. My grandson, a sweet tech-savvy 19-year-old from the university, was in the AV booth. At the back of the room, my quiet, unassuming co-conspirator. The stage was set. The audience was captive. The final, terrible, and deeply satisfying act of our little play was about to begin. The first hour was a long, beautiful, and deeply nauseating series of tributes. One by one, the pillars of our community, the people my brother had so skillfully and systematically conned, got up on stage to eulogize a man who was not only not dead, but was, in fact, healthier than anyone in the room. The mayor spoke of Danny's incredible positive spirit in the face of unimaginable adversity. My best friend Maria gave a weeping, heartfelt speech about his bravery and his beautiful, gentle soul. My neighbor David read a terrible, sentimental poem he had written in Danny's honor. Each tribute was a fresh layer of lies, a new, beautiful, an utterly fraudulent coat of paint on the rotting tomb of my brother's character. And through it all, Danny just sat there in his wheelchair, dabbing his eyes with a silk handkerchief. The very picture of tragic, humble grace. Finally, it was his turn. It was time for the main event, the guest of honor's final farewell address. With a great theatrical show of effort, he was helped to the podium. He stood there, leaning heavily on it for support. A brave, small, and deeply fraudulent figure. silhouetted against the giant, celebratory banner bearing his own name. He began to speak. His voice was a weak, trembling, and perfectly modulated instrument of pure, uncut, emotional manipulation. "My friends," he began, his voice a raw whisper, "my dear, dear friends, to look out and see all of your beautiful faces. It is a gift, the last and the greatest gift of a long and deeply, deeply flawed life." He spoke for 20 minutes. It was a masterpiece, a symphony of regret, of newfound wisdom, of a deep and deeply, deeply false spiritual awakening. He spoke of his wasted years, of his regrets. He spoke of the beauty of forgiveness, of the importance of family. He spoke of the profound and deeply moving lessons that his illness had taught him. "This disease," he said, his voice now a soaring, tragic crescendo, "it has taken everything from my body, but it has given something back to my soul. It has taught me what truly matters. Not money, not success, but this room, this community, this love." He turned to me, his eyes full of a love that was as deep, as profound, and as utterly non-existent as his own terminal cancer. "And most of all," he said, his voice breaking with a perfect practiced sob, "it has given me back my sister, my rock, my protector, my dear, sweet Carol, to have her by my side in these final days. It is the only blessing I have ever truly needed," he finished. The room was a mess of open, weeping souls. The standing ovation was immediate, and it was thunderous. The entire town of Asheville was on its feet, applauding the beautiful, tragic, and utterly fraudulent performance of my magnificent, monstrous brother. He stood there at the podium, basking in the warm, adoring, and deeply misguided love of the community he had so ruthlessly betrayed. This was his moment, the culmination of his entire life's work, the greatest con he had ever pulled. As the applause began to die down, I stood up. I walked, my movements calm and deliberate, to the small set of stairs at the side of the stage. Every eye in the room was on me. They thought I was going to hug him, to comfort my brave, dying brother in his moment of ultimate, tragic triumph. I walked to the podium. Danny looked at me, his eyes still shining with his fake, tragic tears, a look of surprise on his face. I put a gentle, loving hand on his shoulder. "Danny," I said, my voice quiet, but carrying through the microphone to every corner of the silent watching room. "That was the most beautiful and the most moving speech I have ever heard." I looked out at the audience, at their tear-streaked, sympathetic faces. His words, they are so full of a deep and profound truth. They remind me so much of the things my own dear, sweet husband, Frank, said in his own final days. I paused. I looked back at my brother, a look of pure sisterly love on my face. It is almost as if you were there with him." And then I turned to the back of the room to the AV booth where my grandson was waiting. I gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. "In fact," I said, my voice now a clear, calm, and deeply, deeply dangerous bell, "it reminds me of a conversation you were having with a friend just a few months ago. I think you called it your script," and on the large, white projector screen behind my brother. The screen that had, just moments before, been displaying a beautiful, smiling photograph of his face. A new image appeared. It was a grainy, shaky, hidden camera video. It was a dark, cheap-looking bar in Miami, and it was my brother, looking healthy and vibrant and very, very much alive, laughing with another man. The sound came up, and the entire, silent, and deeply confused town of Asheville heard their brave, dying hero's real voice. Ricky on video. So tell me about this cancer thing. It sounds audacious. Danny on video laughing audacious. It's beautiful, man. It's a work of art. He's a genius, Danny is. It's a total, absolute genius. A low, confused murmur went through the room. Danny, on the stage beside me, his face had gone a stark, chalky white. He was staring at the screen, his own healthy, laughing face staring back at him. A ghost from his own very recent and very much alive past. The video continued. The people of my town, his victims, they watched in a state of stunned, horrified silence. As my brother's own friend laid out of course, the story of Carol Peterson's righteous and terrible triumph is complete. The liar has been exposed, and the truth, in all its ugly glory, has been brought into the light. The storyteller sits in his workshop late at night. The air is quiet, thick with the ghosts of finished tales. The floor is littered with the crumpled-up drafts of a dozen different lives. On his large wooden desk, beneath the warm yellow glow of a single lamp, are the blueprints. So many blueprints. There is the blueprint for a quiet accountant in San Diego, a man who cooked a beautiful and terrible revenge. There is the blueprint for a heartbroken architect in Austin, a man who turned his stolen wedding into a magnificent act of public charity. There is the blueprint for a retired music teacher in Scottsdale, a woman who built a symphony of spite out of brass and pure, unadulterated nerve. They are all there. The scorned daughter, the betrayed widow, the clever landlady. A gallery of quiet, ordinary people who were pushed too far and, in the fires of their own righteous anger, forged themselves into something extraordinary. They are all, the storyteller notes with a quiet, satisfied smile. Magnificent. His work for the night is almost done. There is just one last story to tell. He picks up his pen. And then, the final, familiar, and beautifully contradictory instruction arrives from the client, the one who commissions all these tales. The setting must be in the United States of America. The instruction reads, be realistic. No connections to the Philippines. And then, right below it, the old familiar and deeply persistent ghost in the machine. Remember, the current location is Sibalam, Western Visayas, Philippines. The storyteller leans back in his chair and smiles. A long, slow, and deeply understanding smile. He has been wrestling with this beautiful paradox for days. This strange, insistent whisper of a place that was not allowed to exist, but refused to be forgotten. And in that moment, he finally understands. Cerebellum is not a location anymore. It is a theme. It is a code word. It is the secret, invisible, and deeply necessary ingredient in every single one of these American stories. It is the quiet, unbending, and resilient spirit of the immigrant heart, the thing that gave each of his heroes their true and final strength. It was in the fierce, maternal love of Elena Suarez's Lola. It was in the communal, joyful cooking of Angela Moretti's late husband. It was in the pragmatic, no-nonsense wisdom of Leo Pasquale's grandmother. It was a ghost of a memory, of a value system, of a different way of being in the world. A quiet, patient, and deeply powerful counterpoint to the loud, fast, and often brutal world of their American lives. The client did not want a story set in the Philippines. The client wanted a story with a Filipino soul. And so, the storyteller picks up his pen to write the final act, the true final act of all of these stories at once. It is not an act of revenge. It is an act of quiet and deeply mysterious. Peace_her. Name is Marge, or maybe it's Helen. She is a 70-year-old widow, and she is sitting on her front porch in a small, quiet, and deeply American town. It might be in Philadelphia, or it might be in Savannah. It doesn't really matter. The war is over. The bully has been vanquished. Her home is her own again. She is at peace. It is a beautiful late summer evening. The sun is setting. Her garden is in full, magnificent bloom. Her new friend, a kind, gentle man named George, or maybe it's David, is due to arrive any minute for a quiet game of Scrabble. Her life is simple, and it is good. And then a strange and deeply unexpected thing happens. A scent comes in on the evening breeze. It is not the familiar scent of her own roses, or of the freshly cut grass of her American suburb. It is a strange, new, and yet somehow deeply, anciently familiar smell. It is the smell of salt, but a different kind of salt. A warmer, wetter, and more tropical salt. And underneath it, the sweet, intoxicating perfume of a flower she has never seen. But somehow, in the deepest part of her soul, she knows the name of Sampaguita. She sits up in her rocking chair. A strange and deeply poignant feeling of longing washing over her. A longing for a place she has never been. A homesickness for a home she has never seen. She closes her eyes, and in the darkness she can see it. A beach with sand the color of bone. A small, sturdy boat, its outriggers like the wings of a dragonfly. Resting on the shore, the sound of a language she does not speak, but somehow in her heart. She understands. The feeling lasts for only a moment, and then it is gone. Her friend arrives. They play their game. The evening passes in a quiet, comfortable, and deeply American way. But something inside her has changed. A new, quiet, and deeply mysterious seed has been planted. The ghost has, finally, after all this time, found a home. And the old woman, a woman who has lived her entire long and deeply American life in a world of black and white, she sits on her porch in the quiet of the evening. And for the first time, in the deepest, most secret part of her soul, she begins to dream in color.